Welcome in to the Bible from CR11. It's good to have you with us. I would invite you, if you like the content of these videos, to subscribe to the channel, to like it, to share it. If you have any questions or you would want me to address a specific question or topic, you can reach out directly to me. You can also email me at bgwcr11@gmail.com. So we're going to begin in part one of this, understanding God's 3 time clocks. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to the end times. And the reason why is because most people will either take what they have heard second, third, fourth-handed information and simply recycle it and repeat it, instead of digging into God's Word and understanding things that are being said. One of the big mistakes we see when it comes to the study of eschatology, the end times, is that people will take something completely out of context, like I spoke about in the first video in Matthew 24. But to get right to the heart of this matter, we're looking at the 3 time clocks that God has given to us that helps us to understand where we are in the course of the history of us, as God says would take place. What has to take place? What is left? Well, the first of these 3 time clocks that we're going to discuss is one that is found in Leviticus chapter 23. In Leviticus chapter 23, God has given to us 7 feasts. These were 7 feasts that the children of Israel observed every year. And these feasts are often misunderstood. These feasts are prophetic. These feasts were to point to a very specific person and the work that God would do, and that person is Jesus Christ. So when we see what He has done and what is left to be done, it helps us to understand where we are in the course of human history. So every year, and we will take these in order, but in every year the Jewish people would make their way to Jerusalem multiple times through the years. And the very first time they would come was during what's called the Feast of Passover, the Passover Feast. It was a 3-day feast, and that 3-day feast was made up of a new festival each and every day. So the first day would have been the actual Feast of the Passover. The second day would have been the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the third feast would be the Feast of First Fruits. So they would celebrate each of these feasts each day over the course of this 3-day period. Now, to kind of get ahead and cut right to the heart of the matter, why do you think Christ, His death, His burial, and His resurrection consisted of 3 days? Now, there may be some secondary reasons or some coincidental reasons that people point to. But the reason it was 3 days is because of these feasts. God had prescribed it to be this way. So when Jesus was executed, He was executed on Passover, on the very day of a feast that symbolized who He was and what He was going to do. The Bible tells you and I that Christ is our Passover in 1 Corinthians 5:7. The second day, as He laid in that tomb, He laid in that tomb before His Father on our behalf as the unleavened bread. Without any spot, without any leaven, without any wrinkle. He was a pure and holy offering for you and for me. And then on the third day, the very day of the Feast of First Fruits, He rose from the dead, being the firstborn among many brethren. And so what we find is that Jesus is our Passover. Jesus is our bread from heaven. Jesus is the first fruits. He fulfilled these 3 feasts to the day, and He fulfilled them fully. Why? Because these feasts are about Him and what He's going to do. So if these feasts are understood correctly, they are to point us to Christ, as John 5:39 tells us. 50 days later, on the day of Pentecost, the Spirit of God came down. That was the 4th feast. So I say all that for this reason. The question is, where are we at in human history? Where are we at in God's prescribed history for us? Well, one of these clocks, obviously, is Leviticus 23. We find that the first 4 feasts have been fulfilled. This is why we as believers, we don't celebrate the Passover. Christ is our Passover. We celebrate him. We don't celebrate a shadow of what's to come because he's already come. We don't celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread because he is our bread, right? We don't celebrate him being the first fruits because he's already accomplished that. We don't celebrate the day of Pentecost because Pentecost has already been fulfilled and the church has been born. So those four are past us. Jesus has come in his first advent and made sure that all of that was accomplished. But there's three more yet to take place. And it is the Feast of the Trumpets, it is the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Those three feasts, the question is biblically, when will they occur? Well, they will occur in Matthew chapter 24, as Jesus tells us himself, beginning in verse 29 and going down, that when he arrives in his second coming, as he arrives in this second coming, he will send forth his angels. They will blow a trumpet, and they will blow the trumpet signifying the Feast of the Trumpets. The Feast of the Trumpets was something that happened every year where Israel from Jerusalem would blow the trumpets, and as they would blow the trumpets, the people had 10 days to make their way to Jerusalem. It was a call to come to God. And once they got there, they would celebrate the Day of Atonement, the day of their redemption, right? The shedding of blood. The prophet Zechariah at the end of Zechariah 12 and the start of Zechariah 13 tells us that when Christ returns, this will be fulfilled. And then the seventh feast is the Feast of Tabernacles, when God would live and dwell among men. And this happens when Christ returns to the earth physically for the second time, right? Because he will establish his kingdom that Daniel speaks of, a kingdom not made with hands, right? It is a kingdom that will last forever. So what we find is that there are three feasts left to be fulfilled: the blowing of the trumpets, the Day of Atonement as prescribed by Christ in Matthew, and what Zechariah touches upon at the end of Zechariah 12 and the start of Zechariah 13, and then Christ dwelling among men, which is found throughout the Old Testament and obviously revealed to us in the New. So we ask, in light of these seven feasts, where are we at in the course of human history? Is there any other feast that has to be fulfilled before the rapture is to take place, or before the tribulation is to happen? According to this time clock, no. Everything that had to be accomplished in order for those things to be set into motion has been accomplished. So this first time clock that God has given to us tells us that nothing stands in that way. We're going to explore this a little bit more in depth as we see the two time clocks that God has given us through the prophet Daniel. Until then, take care, neighbor, and we look forward to seeing you very, very soon.